Urban legend storytelling for a sleep. I didn't come to Adams for ghosts. I came for sound. You learn, hauling microphones through forests and vacant mills, that every place has a pulse. Wind shakes reed grass differently than chain link. Rivers have vowels. Even old wooden houses speak if you stand still long enough. For years, I'd pieced together atmospheres for podcasts and documentary shorts, the breath between words that makes the words feel true. There are men who go to famous battlefields for EVP sessions. I tell myself I'm not one of them. I came to Adams, Tennessee in late September because the cicadas were thinning and the mosquitoes would be bearable, and because there is a cave on the Red River where stories cling like moss. The locals call it the Bell Witch Cave. They say it's where she, whoever she was, hid and sang and sometimes spoke as clear as a woman standing on your porch asking for sugar. I told myself I was chasing folklore, not a ghost. But I packed extra batteries. The cottage I rented sat back from a gravel road that ran parallel to a cornfield, its tassels gone dry and papery. The house was one room deep, cedar shake roof, porch light that worked when it wanted to. The owner left a note on the table, keys in the bowl, pump needs priming in the mornings, don't leave food out, raccoons, watch the bluff in the rain. Next to the note were two things I didn't expect: a brass handbell on a leather thong and a small basket of woven sweetgrass, the kind you see in roadside stands along the coast. The bell was dull with age, turned the color of old coins. The basket contained nothing but itself. I had an hour of light left. Gnats shimmered in the air like dust trapped in honey. I walked the property with my boom mic and headphones, doing what I always do, listening before I'd earned the right to interview anything. Cornfield wind, tree frogs, a distant pickup on a cracked county road. The cottage walls exhaled when the shade reached them. The brass bell at my belt clinked with each step, an accidental bit of foley. It felt foolish to carry, like wearing a charm you don't believe in. Behind the cottage, the land sloped toward the river. The bluff wasn't high, but the water had bitten it ragged over time, and the reddish mud showed through where the roots clutched. I could hear the river before I could see it, a steady consonant. When I reached the edge, coolness rose from the dark below. There was a faint sweetness in the air, rotting leaves, damp limestone, something animal. The mouth of the cave was smaller than pictures online made it look, shaped like a question mark fallen on its side. I didn't go in. I stood with my headphones on and the mic pointed at the opening and waited. The river crooned. Something inside the cave dripped at an irregular interval, no rhythm I could tap my finger to. I closed my eyes. Just before the light tilted out, for a moment, the world widened. A low, hollow tone carried through my headphones, as if someone had run a wet finger along the rim of a crystal glass. Not loud, not close, but sure. I pulled the cans away, heard nothing with my bare ears but water and crickets. I put them back on. Silence. Then a whisper like cloth dragged across stone. Then the tone again, higher this time, and closer to a voice than to music. "Hello?" I said without thinking, into the mic, which is the dumbest thing a sound person can do. You never address the subject through your equipment. It's like praying into a phone. The tone slid up, transparent as frost. Something moved on the ledge beside my boots. When I looked, a length of grass lay there, woven into a braid. The stalks were green, fresh. I bent to pick it up. It was simple, 3 strands, neat. The ends were chewed, as if woven by small, impatient teeth. The light thinned. I told myself raccoon. I told myself a bored teenager. I told myself I had enough for the day. The cottage felt smaller when the dark came. I've slept in a lot of places alone. Sound people are always last to leave, but the room pressed close here, as if it wanted to hear my breath to measure itself against it. I cooked on the hot plate, washed the pot in the basin, set my recorder on the table and watched its red light blink. The day unwound itself into a low hum. The bell on the table didn't move. At midnight, I woke to 3 knocks on the wall above my bed. If you've ever told yourself, "I don't spook easy," if you've posted it, if you've made it part of your work persona, here's a thing that will strip you bare. The sound of knuckles on boards right where your head is. It is intimate in a way you can't prepare for. It says someone knows where you are down to the inch. I lay there listening to my own heart rushing like an animal pinned in the dark. 3 knocks, then nothing. I counted to 60. I counted to 100. The room returned to its original size. When I finally slept again, I dreamed in muffled rooms. In one, a gray woman combed hair that reached the floor, and each time the teeth snagged, she hummed. In another, I held a microphone and no sound would enter it. The world on the other side of its metal mesh was sealed like a jar. In the morning, the note on the table had a new line. Bell keeps raccoons away if you hang it by the door. The handwriting was mine. I stood very still, reading the sentence again and again. The paper was the same, torn from the same tablet. My name wasn't signed, but it had my hand's impatience in it. I had no memory of writing it. The bell lay where I'd left it. I looped the thong over a nail by the door. It swung and found balance. Outside, the cornfield was calmer. Insects kept to their business. I made coffee too strong and tasted iron in the water, and decided I'd buy bottled in town. I needed batteries anyway. On the way, at the one gas station with a faded mural of a riverboat, the clerk watched me more than clerks usually do. He was my age, maybe, or my age plus more years in the sun. "You're the one staying at Janet's," he said as he rang up my things. The bell I'd hung must have left a smell on my skin, because his nostrils flared a fraction. "Don't go in that cave if it's rained within 2 days." Bluff? Something like that. He placed the batteries in a small paper bag carefully, like eggs. "You doing the tour? They don't run 'em steady this time of year, but folks'll open up for you if you ask right. I'm more interested in ambient." I gestured with the recorder in my hand. The clerk's gaze stuck on it. He smiled, then stopped. "Sound'll get you." He lowered his voice. "It don't stick to nothing the way you think." "Pardon? Nothing." He watched himself bag a pack of jerky. He didn't meet my eye when I left. That afternoon, I set a pair of mics at the bluff, pointed them not at the cave but out across the river to catch the way the water spoke into the air. I let the whole town pass through me, sparrows rattling in brush, a barge on the far side with its engine thrumming, a laughter in what must have been the high school field because it came and went like a ball tossed and caught. When I turned to go back to the cottage, I found another braid of grass in the path. Not a foot from my boot, as if something standing near me had dropped it on purpose. "Hello?" I tried again, but this time into the world, not the mic. No answer, only the wheel of a leaf beetle in duff, and a crow telling its single black joke. That night, 3 knocks came at 1, then again at 2. I don't know what time, because when I woke from that second one, the clock's red digits were all zeros like a mouth held open. I got up and put my ear to the plank wall and heard faintly a breath that wasn't mine. My own breath slowed to match it. It wasn't until it ratcheted up, and then I did too, that I realized what I was doing. Being led. I stepped away, heart a drum, and the bell by the door answered my fear with a small, inquisitive tap. I slept between the second and the third knock like a person lying on top of ground where a snake is burrowing. When I woke in the gray before dawn, something pulled my hair. Not hard. Like a mother telling her child it's time. I sat up. A thin lock of my hair had been braided, tight and precise, near the nape of my neck. The braid was not there when I lay down. My hair is too short for plaits. I touched the little woven starter and felt tears prick, unbidden, the way your eyes water when you bite into mint. "Okay," I said into the room. My voice sounded wrong. It sounded like it belonged to the air in here already, like it was something the walls made for their own amusement. "Okay." I took the recorder and clicked through last night's file, going backward. You never do that, but I didn't want to climb. I wanted to back down into the sounds I had already survived. Frog, mouse in the wall, knocks, knock, 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 a pause, then my breath. Then, and I had missed this asleep, a whisper, bare as a spider's footfalls. Hush. I don't scare easy. I do, however, run out of explanations at a rate proportional to sleep lost. I told myself the whisper was a vocalic wind, a mouth-shaped draft through a knothole. I told myself it was my mind mapping words onto the mess of noise the way we find faces in clouds. I told myself, as the day shook itself awake, and the river raised its tone and the cicadas began their lazy sawing, that a person alone can tilt any small sound toward the brink of meaning and watch it leap. Before noon, I decided to go into the cave. If I write that sentence as if it were a decision, it wasn't. I felt pulled, like the lock of hair had become a leash. I brought a headlamp, fresh batteries, the recorder, and the bell. The bell felt ridiculous and necessary all at once. I used it to knock mud from my boots at the mouth of the cave, and then hung it at my belt again so it could tell me if I moved wrong. Inside, the air hugged me, the way a damp towel wraps your shoulders after swimming. The floor was slick and uneven. The headlamp outlined the walls in sharp white, and they came forward to meet it like teeth in a smile. The cave didn't go back far, 40 feet, 50, before it kinked to the side into a passage only a child would enjoy. I stayed in the first chamber. There were initials on the rock in places where people had carved names they didn't deserve to leave. I leaned close to one, tracing it with my finger. The letters K and B beside each other, intertwined, old enough to be smoothed by fingers doing exactly what mine did now. The stone was cool and a little greasy, the way limestone is. I felt stared at. "Kate," I said without meaning to. The recorder in my hand vibrated like an animal wanting down. Back at the cottage, I listened to the capture sitting cross-legged on the bed. There was the rumble of river. There was the drip inside the cave, irregular as a heartbeat, waking from a nightmare. There was my voice, unwelcome. And there, when I said what I said, was the sound of the bell at my belt chiming once, soft as a spoon touching the edge of a teacup. Then there was the other voice. "Don't," it said, clear as anything. I jerked the headphones off like they were hot. The room held its breath and then let it out, a long sigh through the gaps in the sash. "Okay," I said aloud to no one. The bell on the door tapped, tap, tap, a conversational fidget. Just after dusk, a rain began, hesitant and apologetic, like the sky testing whether it still remembered the steps. It got brave. The roof ticked and then drummed. The note about the bluff and the rain floated up through my skull, but I pushed it down again with bourbon. At 10, the knocks came, not on the wall this time, but on the underside of the bed, directly beneath me. 3, as always. I slid to the floor with a sound so small I wished I had a word for it, because if I could name that sound, I could control it. I lifted the bed skirt. The small woven basket lay under there. It had been empty on the table. Now it was full of hair. My hair, not much, but enough that I knew it. It smelled like me and also like river. I reached for it, and the hair inside moved in a slow breath. "Hush," I said to the nothing. "Hush," the nothing said back to me from a place between the floorboards and the mud. I didn't sleep. I sat with the recorder running, not because I planned to listen later, but because the little red light was something I could look at. I counted the seconds between drips from the leak beside the window and found they were exact only when I wasn't measuring. When I looked, they became coy. When I looked away, they fell in time with a clock I could almost hear. At 3, my phone vibrated with a text. No number, just blank. The message was an audio file. I should have thrown the phone across the room. I hit play. It was my mother's voice, the way she sounded when she was 30 and I was 5, singing in the kitchen at night over the clatter of dishes. The song about the mockingbird and the looking glass and the billy goat, each verse promising something more impossible than the last. A lullaby is a promise you make knowing you will break it eventually, because the Jew's harp will rust and the bull will die, and the baby will learn you can't fix the world with a song. My mother's voice in my phone was sweet and thin with fatigue and exactly right. She's alive, my mother, and she doesn't use this number. She doesn't send audio files. She certainly didn't record that when I was 5. But for a long minute, I let myself forget how phones work, and I cried. I cried because someone remembered exactly the shape of being small in a worn-down house. I cried because the voice knew where to put the breath in the second line. When it finished, the bell by the door rang, not tentative this time, not conversational. It rang like a call to gather. I could have left then. I could have driven to the gas station and stood under the buzzing fluorescent lights and watched the clerk peel price tags off canned peaches and told myself 18 reasons this place deserved nothing from me. Instead, I put the bell in my pocket and I went back to the cave. The rain made the path treacherous, but the field loved it. The corn whispered yes to every drop. The river widened its shoulders and spoke louder. The mouth of the cave exhaled a breath colder than the rain and more personal. I crouched to enter, bell in one hand, headlamp in the other, and paused just inside so my eyes could remember how to forgive darkness for being itself. My recorder hung at my throat like a saint's medal. I took 3 steps. The floor slicked. I took another. Something in the dark moved with me, not away from me, not toward me, but in parallel, like a person who thinks they are invisible and wants to test their theory. "Hello," I said, because I'm rude, and because when something rises to your mouth, it owns you. "I heard you." "Did you?" said a woman's voice, from behind me and in front of me and from the recorder all at once. My knees went soft. I shut off the headlamp. The rain on the world above hushed itself, as if it too wanted to hear. I'm listening," I said. "I say that to men who survived mill accidents, to women who left church angry and brave, to kids whose voices crack when they tell you about their fathers. It's a thing I know how to say. It worked here too. The cave liked it. The cave settled around us like a shawl. You brought the bell," she said, and I heard a smile in the words. Not pleased, not cruel, but interested. "They always bring me something to ring. I didn't know." "You always know." The voice was closer without moving. "The skin knows, the breath knows. The words take longer, but you made it." I held the bell, leather thong in my fist. It answered the voice by tremoring, tiny like a mouse quivering in a cat's paw. "What's your name?" I asked, because some old part of me remembered a rule. "Don't let it name you first." "I have 100, she said. "I like the one you said on the rock." "Cat," the bell clapped my knuckles. "Don't," she said, gentle as a mother unthreading a bead from a child's nose. "Names are doors. You want to open yours tonight?" I stopped. I breathed. The cave breathed back at me. Somewhere behind me in the dark, a drop of water landed in a pool, and I felt the surface tension release as if my skin were the water. I made my voice steady. "I came to record," I said, because it was truer than any other sentence. "I came because when I was little, my mother sang, and the room around us got bigger and safer, and that stopped one day, and I've been trying to build rooms out of sound ever since." "Will you play me what you made?" she asked, very soft. I queued up the file from last night, the whisper that might have been wind, the hush that might have been my mind, the knock, knock, knock. I held the recorder in the air like an offering. The voice hummed along with the drips. She fitted between them. "There," she said when my breath faltered on the recording. "That's when you knew you were not alone." "I knew I was tired," I said, and the bell laughed. There is a way a small bell can laugh. It doesn't have to ring to say ha. "Listen," she said, and there were voices in the dark I hadn't noticed before because the first one was so greedy. Men and women, old and thin as winter and young and shivery. Somewhere an old man prayed with his teeth set. A girl called her dog by a name that belonged in 1904. A soldier said nothing at all, but touched the butt of a rifle gently to stone. A child asked if anyone was home, and someone else told him yes, but it was a lie. These weren't recordings. These were the shadows of things that had bounced off these walls and never fully left. I could have unspooled for hours listening to the residue of other people's urgency, but the voice in front of me, beside me, inside my throat, grew bored with my distraction. She sighed, and the sigh stirred the hair at the back of my neck. "You brought me a bell," she said again, in the tone of an aunt repackaging your poor gift into something she could use. "What will you ring for me?" "What do you want?" I asked. The polite words had run out. This was a naked question. "I want the room you make when you listen. I want the bigger. I want the safety. I want your pulse laid under me like a blanket." "People say," I began, and she chuckled, People say I pinched a farmer and kissed a soldier and killed a man and saved a woman. People say I trailed riders through the dark and bit a mule to teach a general manners. People say I climb into your bed and braid your hair so I know what your head weighs. A pause. That last one is true. Your head is light as a child's still. Don't ruin it yet. What happens if I give you what you ask? You won't leave, she said simply. You can walk out of here, even now, in your wet boots and your foolish pride and your brass toy. But if you do it after you've laid your room down for me, you'll go with an echo where your breath should be. You will talk for money and for love, and no one will hear the part of you that matters, because it will be playing here night after night for the mice and the dead and the raccoons with their clever hands and whatever I am. And if I don't, I will braid your hair so tight you will dream in straight lines until you die. She sounded bored again. You came to listen, she said, as if she were reminding an elderly relative why they'd entered a room. So listen. She put her mouth to my ear and said very quietly, "Hush." It wasn't a warning. It was instruction. It was mercy. It meant for once you don't have to fill the air. It meant you can let the world be. I don't know how long I stood there with the recorder off, the bell in my hand heavy as a heart. The rain outside waxed and waned. A car passed on the road, and the tires on wet gravel made the sound of a hand brushing a rough cheek. Somewhere a raccoon climbed down a sycamore tail first, muttering. The cave did not close on me. It made room. When I finally spoke, my voice was dusty. "I can leave the bell." "Thank you," she said, and there was hunger in it. I nearly dropped the bell, wanting to be rid, but I remembered the clerk's words, "Sound doesn't stick where you think." I wrapped the thong around a stalagmite and tied a neat knot, the way you tie a boat to a dock with a current that will test your work. The bell hung still. "Ring it," she said. "So I know what you sound like." I didn't want to. I did. It wasn't loud. It was clean, the way a well-drawn line is clean. It hung in the air too long, the way campfire smoke hangs in your sweater. And inside the ring there were things I didn't put there. A twinge like a violin tuning. A child's laugh cut off early. The whisper of my own name spoken by a voice I didn't recognize from any year I've had. She inhaled like someone smelling bread after famine. "Go on," she said. "Make me a room." I lifted the recorder to my lips and spoke into it low enough that the cave had to lean close to catch it. I told it the story of a woman singing because the dishes were done and the house was poorer than it liked to be. And I told it about cornfields and September air that wants to be October. And I told it about looking for the vowel in a river. And I told it about the knocks and the hair and the basket and the word hush scrawled across my dreams like someone had wet their finger and dragged it along gathering dust. The recorder ran. The bell listened. The cave made itself wider until there could have been two of me inside it, and both would be safe as long as they did nothing foolish. "Good," she said when my voice cracked. "Good." "Now what?" I asked, small. My hand had gone numb around the recorder, and I only noticed when I tried to set it down and had to pry my fingers loose. "Now you go," she said. "You promised me a room. You made it." Something like regret edged into her voice. "You have a pretty breath. Remember it. Don't show it off. Keep it for yourself sometimes." "That's it?" I asked, irony brittle on my tongue. "I get to leave?" "You always get to leave," she said. "You don't always get to keep." I left. The rain had quit. The path up from the bluff had grown stranger under the dripping trees. Each leaf shook itself at me like a tiny wet dog. The cottage threw its window squares into the night. When I opened the door, the braided grass lay on the threshold like the note of a violin I had forgotten to finish. I stepped over it. The bell was not by the door. Something in my chest ached, sudden as a pulled tooth. I slept. I dreamed I was 5 and my mother had a second voice, the one she used when she wanted me to believe I was brave. In the morning, the pump needed priming. The note on the table was blank. I left cash and a thank you. I washed the coffee cup. I carried the recorder out in my hands like a small animal. The clerk at the gas station glanced down when I set my things on the counter, then up, then something like a sadness passed over his face that he tried to herd away before I could notice. "You got out," he said. "I was never in," I said. He shook his head, not arguing. "You going back?" "Home," I said. I didn't say which direction that was. He bagged my donuts and my bottled water, and then, as if he'd changed his mind about something, he leaned forward. "She's worse when folks talk too nice about her," he said. "She thickens in the air like glue. Best to let her be a cave again. Best to let that river say what rivers say." I wasn't planning to. I started, but the words lay down in my mouth and slept. I nodded. I left. On the 2-lane, my hands stayed at 10 and 2 without me asking them. The trees went by like dark memories. At the first place with a decent signal, I stopped and loaded the files so I could make sure I hadn't hallucinated a week. The metadata was sensible. Timestamps behaved. The waveforms were what waveforms look like when they want to be taken seriously. Rounded, imperfect, full of the bottoms of things. I pressed play. It was good. That's a terrible, simple word, but it was. The river spoke its low vowels, and the cave fitted itself into the consonants, and my voice had a texture in it I didn't recognize, something like smoke, something like the feeling in your shoulders when someone you love is still sleeping beside you, and you are awake enough to be grateful. When the bell rang, oh, that bell, it ran a hand down my spine. I stopped the file, breathing fast. I thought of deleting it. I thought of throwing the recorder into the ditch and letting a culvert take it to the Cumberland, and from there to the Ohio, and from there to wherever brave water goes. Instead, I listened again. Then I burned it to a card with a name that means nothing unless you were there. Room. Back in my apartment, days later, with the city scratching at my windows like it always does, I tried something I should not have. I brought the mic close to my mouth and whispered the vowel in the river, and then the name on the rock, careful and soft, eyes closed, as if I could keep the sound from leaving the room if I did not watch it go. The lamp on my desk flickered, not electrically, but as if the light had thinned near the base and needed a hand to help it climb. My hair tightened at the back of my neck in a little tug, exactly like someone reminding me the time was short. Somewhere deep in the apartment, the bell I had not brought home, a bell I did not own anymore, rang once, far away, polite and patient, and sure I would hear it. Hush, I told myself, and the word had the shape of a cave. In the months after, my work got better. I'm not being coy, it did. Editors used adjectives that made me proud and suspicious at the same time. Listeners wrote in and said they felt like the rooms in my pieces had corners they could lean into. A man cried because of a soft water sound I shaped under a prisoner's voice. My mother called, unprompted, and sang one verse of the Mockingbird song into my voicemail on a Wednesday, saying she had it stuck in her head and why should she be the only one. Sometimes, in those small between hours when the city coughs and the radiator remembers last winter, I hear 3 knocks on the wall where there is no neighbor. Sometimes I wake with a little braid in my hair that falls apart when I laugh and pretend I am not frightened of the way it knows how to start itself without a mirror. Once, when I bent to look under the bed for a dropped pen, the woven basket was there for a breath, full of nothing at all, and then it was dust again. I have not gone back to Adams. I tell myself it's because I have enough good river already and we should not be greedy, and because caves deserve to be caves more days of the year than they are names. I tell myself that my bell is where it belongs, tied to a rock that has worn the grief of 100 hands smooth, ringing for whoever needs to stand in a room bigger than their fear. Not long ago, in an edit suite where the AC hums like a choir when it's bored, a producer listened to a rough cut and asked, in that careless way people ask when they want to seem informed, "Isn't this from that Bell Witch place? They say she's a bitch." The light in the room thinned near the base and tried to climb. The hairs on my neck pulled once, like reins. In the headphones I lay on the desk, in their stillness, there was a small, patient sound, the shape of a bell preparing itself. "Hush," I told the room, and it did. You think you want a ghost to sing to you. You think you want to be chosen by the story. Maybe you do. Maybe it's good. Maybe a bell is just a bell and a cave is just a cave, and a woman living in the seam between sound and silence is only a way of explaining why your breath stutters sometimes, when the air tastes like limestone and last summer's leaves. Late at night, when the city's pulse slows and mine does too, I close my eyes and listen for the river vowel under the street noise. If I am very quiet, if I am greedy and good at the same time, I can fit the room I made back into my chest long enough to sleep. I do not say names. I do not call. I wait. The bell rings somewhere far enough away that I can pretend I dreamed it, and it is always answering a question I never asked aloud. What happens if you leave the door open? What happens if you make a room for someone else to live in? What happens if a story makes itself in your throat and you carry it around, careful not to shake it too much? Tap, tap, tap. Coming, I whisper without moving, and the apartment grows just barely larger, just enough to contain everything breathing inside it. I am learning not to show it off. I am learning to keep some rooms for myself. Outside, rain begins again, testing the steps, remembering the pattern. A voice in the wall that is not a voice tells me I am not alone. I sleep in a straight line, then bend, then open. In the morning, something will need priming, and I will do it, smiling without knowing, thinking of cornfields and of coins turned the color of the earth by hands. If you come to my door and knock 3 times, I will answer on the second. If you stand under my window and ring a bell I cannot own anymore, I will pretend I didn't hear. If you sit with me in a cave without naming anything at all, and if the water has forgiven the rain and the rock has forgiven the hands, we will listen together until the air in our chests learns the shape of a room bigger than fear. When you get home that night and lie down, if something tugs your hair as if to remind you of the clock, say it back to the dark, gently. Hush. Some things are truer when only the mice and the dead hear them. Some doors don't lock even when you throw the bolts. That's not always a threat. Sometimes it's an invitation to build a better room inside your ribs and keep the bell tied where it belongs, on a knot you tied yourself, on a rock that remembers your pulse. If you listen hard enough, if you deserve it, and also if you don't, you will hear her voice tell you you've made it. Good, she will say, smiling whether you can see it or not. Good. Then she will let you go, which is to say you will go, which isn't always the same thing. The rest you can record if you like. Or you can leave it where it lives, inside the hum of a house that has learned your breath, inside the river's low vowels, inside a cave that isn't a name any more nights than it has to be. If later, alone, the bell rings once far away, answer or don't. Either way, the room will hold. Either way, the corn will lean its heads together and agree what they heard. Either way, the light will thin near the base and climb. And when you sleep, if the braids come, let them. They will fall apart in your laugh in the morning. There is mercy in that. There is something like love. Or maybe that's just the sound of air moving through a small brass mouth, making a room larger than itself for a minute, long enough for anyone who needs it to stand up and feel the edges soften. Tap. Tap. Hush. I drove until the road ran out of lines and the forest swallowed the sky. The GPS lost its nerve somewhere after the last town. 3 stores in a row, one of them boarded up, the other 2 selling fishing lures and gasoline that smelled older than I was. By the time I turned off onto the service road, all the things I'd told myself about solitude and headspace were chewed thin. My phone showed 1 bar of reception and then, as if embarrassed, went blank. The cabin sat at the end of a muddy spur like a bad decision. Cedar shook wind out of their wet shoulders, sword ferns spread like green saw blades, and the stoop sagged under years of rain. I killed the engine, and the silence stepped forward as if it had been waiting its turn. Silence that wasn't quite. Water dripping, far-off creek hiss, crows stitching black thread through the canopy. It had taken 6 hours to get here from the city, and I'd spent most of those hours telling myself I wanted unfamiliar, somewhere to reset while I finished the survey work and the grant application, somewhere with doors I could lock and windows I could see the trees through, somewhere I'd be the only heartbeat for miles. The key was under a chipped cinder block near the step, exactly where the email said it would be. The county had offered the cabin as housing for visiting researchers, a fancy name for half-rotted shack we haven't gotten around to demolishing. I shouldered the door open, and the smell of dust and cold iron and mouse piss bumped into me like a drunk. A pot-bellied stove crouched in one corner, a stack of gray wood beside it. The sink was more aspirational than functional, feeding into a line that I suspected emptied straight out under the building. The bed was a cot wrapped in a thrift store quilt, damp at the corners. a table, a chair, a shelf, and a wall that had known a lot of calendars and thumbtacks. I set my bag down, running through the comfort script. You have firewood, you have food, you have water in the 2 blue jugs, you have a headlamp and an extra headlamp and the little radio that talks to weather towers. You have work to do, 2 weeks of soil sampling and stream mapping for someone's spreadsheet far away. It'll be fine. The table had a guest notebook, a flipping through of other people's need for permanence. I found pencil-scratched grocery lists, sketches of ferns in the stove, someone's recipe for bannock, the coordinates of a fishing hole. Near the back, a page in a hand that pressed so hard the letters bruised the paper. Respect the knocks. Below it, a rhythm written as dots and dashes, 3 clusters with a line between each. Under that, lighter and messier. They keep you in at night. Don't mistake the talker for them. I snorted without meaning to. Folklore. The woods breed it like mushrooms breed rings. By dusk, I'd convinced the stove to breathe and the cabin to act like a place people could inhabit. The kettle added its polite mutter, and the black windows told me how dark it was outside. When I pushed the door, cold rushed the room. Fog pooled like milk over the slope down to the creek. I whistled, and the sound went up and got caught in the cedar boughs and didn't come back. I ate out of a pan and sat with my laptop, trying to type. The radio told me a coastal low was moving in. The barometer needle slid sideways as if it were tired. At some point, I stopped pretending the words on the screen were going anywhere. I turned off the lamp. The fire's light pulled at the ceiling in orange bands. I lay down, listening to the stove tick as it cooled, the forest spool and unspool around me. Sleep has edges you can fall off. As I reached one, a sound found me. Knock, knock, knock. I lay there, my body suddenly the kind that had forgotten how to breathe. The sound hadn't come from the door. It hadn't come from the walls. It had come from the skin of the night itself. 3 knocks with the weight of a hand that knew what it was knocking against. I held still the way animals do when they've been noticed. Long seconds, and then 2 knocks, lower in pitch somehow. I found the notebook. My heart was a fish. Wind, I said aloud. The wind, which didn't knock, didn't answer. The third sequence came after I'd almost convinced myself it would not. One solitary knock, like the period at the end of a warning. I sat up and stared at the black window. The fire had settled into the kind of glow that makes you believe in things beyond the glass. My hand found the headlamp, and then found the fact that shining it out there would turn my windows into mirrors. Instead, I squeezed my eyes shut and counted backward from 100. The night did what it does. It swelled, it receded, it filled with small noises until they were indistinguishable from the inside of my skull. I woke sometime before dawn, chilled and irritable, and went to the door just to prove nothing was out there. On the stoop, 3 small stones sat stacked into a column the height of my thumb. I stood in bare feet and looked at them until the cold hurt the bones in my toes. The stack was neat, as if whatever put it there had fingers. If it had been kids, it would have been a prank without audience. If it had been wind, it would have had to learn to balance. In the daylight, the forest rearranged itself into something almost friendly. A jay argued with something that didn't argue back. The creek gave up its own voice. The scent of cedar pitch and wet bark layered over the sawdust of the cabin. I ate and told myself the rocks had a rational explanation, then wrecked that explanation by leaving the rocks exactly as they were. It felt wrong to move them. It felt like ignoring a signpost because you didn't like what it was pointing to. I took the long loop down toward the water to refresh my mind with work. Hoe and Sitka spruce clawed at the sky. Nurse logs lay like wet bones with gardens of moss on their backs. I collected water at the flagged points the last surveyor had left, peered through the black glossy faces of puddles at larvae, recorded pH. Normal work, numbers like stones you can step across a stream on. Still, my hand refused to stop remembering small details. Strands of vine maple woven into hanging loops at knee height across the path like gates. A smell that came intermittently, animal and musky, like a blanket left in a barn and rained on. Near the bend where the creek slipped under a tangle of downed alder, I found tracks in the mud. Deer, raccoon, something else. Bare, as if someone had gone without shoes in hell-cold water, and then stepped where I could not help but see. The toes were long, almost finger-like. The print was longer than a man's boot, wider than my spread hand. The mud had slumped, but the shape was still there, unarguable. "Okay," I said, deriding my sudden need to look over my shoulder. It was probably a warped boot, a trick of erosive flow, but I couldn't make the tread pattern emerge, and I couldn't make the track smaller just by wanting it to be. I took photos. I took more photos, as if quantity would prove something to me that quality could not. Back at the cabin, the stones had been rearranged. The bottom one had moved to the top to the bottom. I hadn't been gone long enough for another person to walk here and back without leaving something I'd notice, a footprint, a cigarette butt, anything. The sensation of being observed surprise hurt me like biting down on foil. I did sensible things. I ate. I swept. I tried to ignore the notebook page that might as well have rippled on the table like a pond. It was almost funny how fast the mind erodes under a little pressure of quiet and strangeness. In the city, I'd fallen asleep with podcasts and neighbors and engines like white noise. Here, the space was an extra participant. It noticed where I put everything. It kept score. On the second evening, I built a larger fire and made tea twice as strong as I usually would. When the cabin had warmed to a temperature that made my fingers work, I propped the door and sat on the stoop watching the fog go silver. The first knocks came while I was clumsy with the mug. 3, then 2, then 1. The pattern was the same, but something else threaded it. A low hum that I didn't exactly hear so much as feel in the cartilage of my ears and the meat of my chest. A frequency just below noticing, like the idea of bees. The orange edge of my vision pulsed with it. I set the mug down and put my hands flat on the wood. The knock sounded again, and my palms, pressed to the step, felt it, distant, as if someone far away were drumming on the earth with patience. "Respect the knocks," I said, my breath visible. It was only partially a joke now. "Okay." Then from the tree line a voice, "Hello." It was thin and high, like a child asking in a place they shouldn't be. It stroked something old in me, the part that stands when you hear a cry in a grocery store and start scanning for a small face. It came again, closer. "Hello." I was already reaching for the headlamp when my brain, working as if underwater, caught something wrong in it. Not the wrong like an accent or a cold or a mouthful of food. Wrong like a recording you've played too many times until the tape stretches. The consonants a little melted, the vowels placed like they'd been memorized as shapes rather than sounds. The hello had 3 holes in it, 3 exact breaths between syllables. I didn't move. The voice drifted along the edge of the clearing, never resolving into footsteps. Once it tried a new word and produced a lengthened please. The mist took it apart. Inside, the notebook sat open to the page. Don't mistake the talker for them. The knock sounded then, once, twice, louder, as if from the left and the right at once, and I felt my scalp tighten. The hum in my chest deepened. The thing at the tree line went quiet. I stood up and shut the door, just like that, like I'd been told, like a kid who doesn't know what all the rules are, but knows who's in charge. Sleep came in handfuls, and in the handfuls were things that made my teeth ache. The idea of a face pressed against the glass I refused to look at, the weight of something stopping midway across the floor, deciding whether it would finish the journey. Somewhere in there, the radio woke for a moment with a voice like a weather announcer, and then shredded itself into static, so sincere it sounded like the ocean. Dawn was a bruise on the horizon. I went out and found something on the steps that wasn't rocks. A woven loop of grass and cedar strips, a bracelet or a ring for a creature with bones thicker than mine. The edges were neat. The weave pattern made a kind of braid that tugged at the memory of a book I'd read about memory itself, that hands remember differently than words do. Whoever had made it had a muscle memory I did not possess. A bored teenager could have made it. A bored teenager would have used paracord and posted it on TikTok. I hung it inside on a nail. It felt like the thing to do. I'm not an idiot. I am, however, stubborn and broke. The idea of packing up and driving out with nothing to show for it was humiliating in a way that pushed exactly on my pride. I filled my pack with plastic bags and flagged stakes and the field spectrometer. I walked upriver instead of down. The map said there was a ravine that cut across the lot line, and the ravine meant water, and water meant data, and anything that equaled data had never once in my life equaled fear. The air up there had fewer sounds stitched into it. The forest floor became a quilt of moss with damp unravelings. I must have stepped over 100 windfalls and under 100 archways of crooked alder before the woods opened into a space of no understory. No ferns, no huckleberry, no moss. The ground was scraped bare of its green coat in circles large enough to park cars in. In the center of each ring, the mud had been worked with sticks into patterns like ribs or the spokes of a wheel. Small things hung from the branches like prayer flags, fish spines, the carved-out barks of cedar limbs, the pelt of something that had not died of old age. The air there was dead, but not in the way of peace. It tasted metallic, like putting a battery on your tongue. Men make circles like this sometimes. They pile rocks, they build fires. Teenagers do it to drink around. Campers do it to pretend they're the first people to stand there. But the middle of each circle bore score marks too deep for knives and too deliberate for claws and nothing else. No ashes, no beer cans, no fire pits. The people who make those circles leave evidence. Whoever made these took their evidence with them. On the far side of the ring, a sapling had been bent to the ground and staked, the bark wounded where the trunk wanted to be up again. Something white lay in the stank mud near it. Plastic, scratched and muddy. I knelt to pick it up and realized I was holding a camera. Not a phone, an old digital camera, the lens jammed like a stuck eye. When I turned it over, there was tape on the back with letters half peeled off. I rubbed the grime with my thumbnail. I could make out no at the start of one word, and low at the start of the next. Not, don't. It didn't matter. Whatever those words had been, they hadn't protected the camera. I was not brave enough to stay long. I packed a pocket full of samples fast enough to feel like a thief. On my walk back, the trees near the circle watched me with the kind of attention you feel when you've stayed too long in someone else's kitchen and they're waiting for you to take the hint. The bracelet hung on its nail when I came in, and I felt myself look at it with gratitude that surprised me. I hung the camera beside it, a dumb talisman, and went about pretending to be productive until the light had slipped and pooled and begun to drain away again. The knocks came right as the stove drew down to a red that suggests the dark outside a house has weight. 3, 2, 1. The hum in my body came up like a fever. The talker waited a long time before it tried me. Hello? The wrongness in it was easier to hear now, like I had learned its accent. The night seemed to swell when that voice entered it, and everything else that lived in the night withdrew. The smell of musk gusted in and was shoved back by a different smell, ranker, closer to ammonia than to animals, like something that had lived a long time in a damp space and kept all of its breaths in jars under the bed. I didn't light the headlamp. Every hair on my arms was an antenna. My mouth tasted like penny. I hear you, I said, low. The thing tried me with a new array of phrases. Please, hurt, help, me. Each time it nailed the consonants and broke the vowels like ice cubes cracking in too hot water. My name came next, and that rocked me. Noah, the first syllable lifted, the second fell. Perfect. Noah! I learned the shape of my own stupidity by standing up. The door throbbed with its own heartbeat through my palm. Fear mine, bouncing off wood like an echo. How had it learned my name? I had not told it. I had told no one here. Unless the camera had belonged to someone who told someone who told someone who told a thing that could listen. Unless the thing did not need telling. Knocks again, left and right, like hands laid on either side of my skull. 3, 2, 1. The door latch trembled once, twice, then, decisive pressure, steady. The wood complained, a long-winded groan. Whoever had designed this cabin had not imagined fingers like pry bars. I slid the bolt home and set the chair under the knob, an infantile move. The window closest to the door bowed inward and bumped the nails. For a second I could see an outline beyond it, a darker dark in a suit of darkness. Something very tall. Not tall like basketball. Tall like telephone pole. Steady. Not human. It did not press its face to the glass. It stood a step back, as if to say, I will not break your barrier if you respect this. The door jerked again, the wood fibers making a sinewy, intimate sound that sent adrenaline like salt through me. Then an entirely different impact. Higher, sharper, like someone had hurled a rock from very close and it had split as it hit the siding. There were two things out there. That was the sweaty, offhand thought that pinned itself in my mind. There were at least two, and the knocks belonged to one and the voice to the other, and they were not on the same side. I'd brought a flare because someone had told me once you should always carry fire you can make without wood. I had laughed when I packed it. I was not laughing when I yanked it open and touched it off. It filled the cabin with a low sun, and my own fear skittered away from it like beetles. I shoved the flare into a coffee can so I could hold it without branding myself, and considered my next act from the menu of explorable mistakes. "Back," I said, with a conviction I did not own. "I'm staying inside." Silence. Then the talker, so close it felt like breath, reached under the door and moved across my ankles in a tone that approximated a child almost perfectly. "Let me in, Noah." I did not say I was not that stupid. I did not say anything. The fire growled in its small iron belly. The flare hissed and gossiped. The knocks rolled like thunder you feel before you hear. 3, 2, 1. When the window broke, it did not shatter. The oldest glass does that crazy molten sugar stretch and then tears. The talker came through on a telescoping limb that ended in something like a hand, if a hand forgot halfway through what it was supposed to be. It was pale where the light caught it, not white, but the inside of something that had never seen the sun and should not have. It buckled the chair aside with no regard for furniture and scrambled in with a motion that lit evolution backward in my mind. Mammal to reptile to something else that had only ever been hungry. The smell hit me first. Ammonia, an old wet dog, and pennies, and something like vinegar. The head that followed the arm was wrong in the way you see in nightmares. Too many grace notes in the wrong place. The face was the idea of a face put together by a person who had read about faces but never owned one. It had hair in patches like poorly planted sod. The mouth was wide, wider than I would have believed a living thing needed. The eyes were set under a ledge like river stones. It saw me and said, in a pitch-perfect imitation of my mother, "It's late," and then tried again, a man's voice this time, "You're safe." Then, like a recording slowing under a finger, sliding syllables around, "Saf." I had always thought of myself as someone who would, in the moment, become decisive, strategic. What I did was shove the coffee can under the thing's chin. It screamed. The scream wasn't designed for me. It was designed for trees and caves and for the way frequencies bounce off rock. It put a hand over its mouth like someone embarrassed and made a different noise that was worse, a deep pulsing warble that my body recognized without the courtesy of my mind, a warning noise, an ownership noise, a sound you do not hear if you plan to keep your bones arranged the way they are. The cabin's other window went white. Something moved by it. Height, bulk, the kind of solid you see as the absence of light. It knocked. 3, 2, 1. The thing in my cabin curled itself with a speed that suggested it was deciding on a new shape. I caught, for one grotesque second, a view of its feet. The toes had pads like hands. The knocks came again, harder, like the trunk of a tree striking a drum. Then, not knocks at all. A sound like someone smacking open palms against a chest, a deep wham that carried through meat and wood and air. The talker bounded for the window it had come through. It didn't bend so much as reassign which components of itself were load-bearing. It made a noise that almost sounded like words, "Sasa," as if the word it was trying to birth was Sasquatch, and it could not shape the consonant into something its mouth wanted. Then it went fluid and poured itself into the night. I followed like an unbelted passenger. Outside, my flare turned the clearing into a molten centrifuge of shadows. In it I saw both of them, and all at once I knew that the word Sasquatch had been a too small cup for what the knocks belonged to, that the stories about hairy apes and unfound primates were the way we tried to make the unknown into something we could point at with a finger and a list of features. The figure at the tree line moved like a thing that grew out of the ground rather than walked upon it. Its hair was not the suit of a bear, it was the coat of a living winter. It was broad and tall and proportioned in a way that warned you not to make monkey/joke and think you had diminished anything about it. Its eyes had a shine that was not the shine of light, but a depth, the way deep water goes black even at noon. Across from it, halfway up the leaning alder, the talker hung with 4 points of contact, muscle vibrating like a saw blade. It busied its mouth trying to make the sound of the thing across from it. The whoomph of chest hit, and it could not. It made a vulgar imitation. It made a pile of them. The tall figure reared and let out a bellow that did not move through the world. The world moved around it. The flare snarled, and the grass ringed with fire. The talker launched, and where it landed, the ground dipped like a mattress, taking a thrown body. It came at the tall one a way I'd never seen animals fight, sideways almost, with both hands out like it would smother rather than strike. I did what people always do when they pretend to help from a safe distance. I yelled. The noise was pebbles thrown at a freight train. The tall one's response to the talker was not elegant. It was precise. It swatted the talker out of the air as if it were the nuisance of a fly that might sting a child. The talker hit a tree with a clunk that white-hottened my fear into clarity. Then it was moving again, a rabid scarf on legs, and the big figure stepped forward and put its body between mine and the thing and struck it. There was no ceremony in the strike, no ritual. No, this is the part where I show my prowess. It was the sort of competence you see in a mother plugging a hole in a dam with her hands so the water doesn't take the house. This is what is needed. Here it is. Go, I heard. I did not hear a word. I heard a direction laying into the architecture of my bones. Go. I went. I did not run far. The forest refuses to let you sprint unless you have trained your whole life in sprinting through roots and droplets and shadow. I went enough to get breath in my mouth that didn't smell like either of them. Behind me, the knocks came again, like a heartbeat that belonged to something with enough blood to matter. The talker threw its voice through 3 different shapes of human and then devolved into squeals of frustration. Something tore. Something else answered with a cracked tree bang. The night closed all the curtains, and I stood outside my own window listening to the metaphor of teeth. When it went quiet, it did so in a way that swelled my head with pressure. The hum in my chest let go like a hand sliding off a steering wheel. I walked back in the flare's dwindling light. The grass had blackened and curled and formed a neat scorch that stopped right at the edge of the cabin like a dog that knows how far it's allowed to go. On the doorstep lay 3 objects: the rearranged stones, the woven bracelet, and a bone I recognized as a knuckle, white and clean and new. The bracelet's weave had been tightened, the ends tucked. There was a new pattern in the braid, a serpentine, subtle twist that my brain translated as, "You are not prey." Inside, I poured water from the jug and ended up sitting down hard on the floor with the cup still in my hand. My hands had become strangers. I wrapped the bracelet around my wrist because doing something with it felt like a decision. And decisions are what help you return from edges. Later, an hour, a week, I understood I had not been afraid in the way I would have been if it were only one thing out there. The fear I felt was the kind of fear you have in the presence of a river in flood. The other thing had been the kind you have in a parking garage when you're sure the steps behind you will get to you before your keys open the lock. I slept because my body decided to sleep. I woke because it was light enough to see what I had not wanted to see at night. The clearing bore scuffs and gouges where bodies larger than mine had changed direction. At the edge of the back wall, the talker had left a streak of fluid that had dried into a resinous flake. It smelled like pennies and bleach. The ground where the big figure had stood had compressed. That was the best way I could think to put it. The earth there looked as if someone had gently pushed down with something very heavy and then released, leaving a depression with softened edges. I found no carcass. The forest is efficient with its dead. I found tufts of hair, black and reddish, and hair that looked like human hair until you touched it, and then it became something else in your mind. More like fiber, more like the plush on an old toy, more like old rope. I put some in a bag because collecting is what I know how to do. I stood by the circles in the ravine and watched the wind not blow there. By mid-morning, I had the truck loaded. The lies I told myself as I locked the cabin door were that I would email the county with my samples and notes, and that I was leaving because the work as structured needed different resources, which it did, and not because the bracelet on my wrist felt like the one useful thing I could carry out of that clearing. I set the stones into a neat triangle as if that meant anything, and I drove. What you carry does not always show. Back in the city, the world chirped and bellowed and clicked at me. Crossing signals told me when to walk. My phone remembered itself and vibrated like it had been storing obligations the whole time. The bruise on my palm from holding the flare looked like an old coin under the skin. At night, I'd lay in my apartment listening to a neighbor's TV through the wall, and that would be fine, because it was the sort of sound you can attribute to people whose names you don't know, but could know if you had the courage to introduce yourself. The first week, I woke twice with the hum in my chest as if a truck were passing outside, and then not. I would hold my wrist and feel the roughness of the braid and tell myself the feeling would go. On the seventh night, I woke to 3 knocks. Not at the door. On the building. 3 deep and measured knocks that came up through the floorboards and through my mattress and up my spine like a rod had been slid into it. I sat up and didn't reach for the lamp. 2 knocks followed, lower. 1 knock came last and left the room empty. By the time I had convinced myself some insomniac neighbor had too much time and a broom handle, by the time I had built a case against superstition that would have looked good to a panel of reasonable adults, the bracelet on my wrist tightened. Not enough to hurt, enough to be noticed. Enough that I put my fingers under it and felt the weave and felt something else. A new pattern at the edge, one I hadn't felt before. You can sense things with your fingers that your eyes never bother to register. I counted the crossovers in the braid, 3, then 2, then 1. I had not imagined it. Someone, somewhere between the door and the woods in this bed, had changed the pattern, or I had miscounted before, which I had not. Out in the hallway, a child's voice said, "Hello." And then, just as I was about to throw the door open on the idiot instinct to save some neighbor's kid from some urban idiot danger, it said, "Please," with the vowels in the wrong places. I did not open the door. The knocks came again, softly, somewhere far away, from an ocean I couldn't put my finger on. A kind of gratitude lifted from my lungs like steam. Respect the knocks. The next morning there was a small ring of wet footprints just inside the building's front door. Human, mostly. A smear of something that washed away while I watched because a janitor had already arrived with a mop. In the mop bucket water, I saw hair that wasn't hair and decided not to tell the janitor anything at all. I mailed my samples to the county. I labeled them with coordinates and pH and conductivity and the normal things. On the last one, I wrote nothing at all on the label. I slipped a printed photo into the package, the one of the tracks by the creek, the print that made my hand look like a child's, and said nothing about it. Words would leach the value out of it. Sometimes that's what words are for. Sometimes. On certain days, the city smells like hot brakes and wet pavement and pretzels and exhaust. On those days, the memory softens and I can convince myself I had an episode, an extravagant moment born of isolation and stress. On certain other days, days when fog lies down in the park like an animal, days when a bus makes a low grinding that hits a bone nothing else ever hits, days when I turn off the hallway lights and touch the braid around my wrist. Those days I remember with the exactness of numbers, 3, 2, 1. Those days I know I was told something by a thing that could knock a rhythm into the earth with its body, about the rules of night in the places between us. Those days I do not mistake the talkers for them. Sometimes I go to the door and put my knuckles against it and tap, 3, 2, 1. I do not expect an answer. What I get is a feeling under the soles of my feet, faint in the same way you feel a truck you cannot see going by 2 streets away. An acknowledgement, a you too. A you're in your house, stay in your house, I am in mine. We could, if we needed to, knock for each other across the dark. And if the talker ever comes again, and it will, because hunger is a thing you can trust to keep its appointments, I will keep my lights off. I will keep my voice in my mouth. I will hold my wrist where the weave rests in the soft skin and think about the circles scraped bare, about the fish spines and the bent sapling, about the bone on the step, white and new. I will remember the simple shape of the tall figure at the edge of the clearing, putting itself between me and the thing that spoke my name wrong. There are boundaries everywhere. Some of them we drew on maps with rulers. Some of them were laid down long before rulers. Some tell you where not to step. Some tell you where to stand and knock and wait. I arrived at the Welcome Center just ahead of the storm, crawling up a road that looked like it had changed its mind halfway through being paved. The GPS dot hovered in a gray-green no-man's land between state forest and reservoir, where the map labels disappeared and the cell signal dropped to a single quivering bar. It was mid-October, shoulder season, the time of year this place slumbered under damp leaves and the notes of last summer's campfires. The ranger who hired me, quick money for a long weekend, just watch the doors, keep an eye on the exhibits, never said why they needed someone. The reservoir was down to a muddy saucer, the fishing shacks shuttered, the trails posted with rain-warped laminated notices about invasive mussels. I took the gig because I needed to not be in my apartment for a while. The Welcome Center was bigger than I expected, a low, modern rectangle all glass and cedar, perched on a knuckle of rock with the reservoir spread below like a dull mirror. Wind shoved the lake into pleats. The building hunkered with its back to the forest, its face to the water, glass walls everywhere. This would be a weekend of my own reflection. I parked under a dripping fir. A single light glowed in the lobby. Inside, the air smelled like wet rope and disinfectant. The volunteer desk had a tip jar full of pine cones, a bowl of crayon nubs, and a plastic binder with rules written in the fused politeness of committee language. The very first line, emboldened and underlined, read, "Welcome our guests." My name was on a sheet beneath. Temporary host, October 14th, 17. They had keyed the alarm code into me over the phone on my way up, a string of numbers that felt more like a dare than security. The panel chirped, accepted me, and fell silent. Lights rose with a hum, drawing out the long interior like a stage. There were dioramas about watersheds and salmon ladders, a looping display of birdsong, a hands-on station with a dissected beaver dam. Beyond the glass, the day sagged toward evening. I could see my car as a wet black smudge under the fur. I wheeled my bag behind the front desk and poured coffee from a pot left on a burner that was definitely not up to code. The coffee was burnt, film curling on top. I drank it anyway, letting the heat edit the damp from my bones. A staff break room sat behind the exhibit hall, dull beige with an oilcloth table and a microwave that still smelled like someone's reheated fish. A corkboard displayed Polaroids of summer volunteers, smiling kids in green shirts, names penned underneath in looping Sharpie: Mara, Felix, Keisha, Max. One Polaroid at the corner showed the front doors, taken from outside. 3 kids stood there staring at the camera. The caption read in different handwriting, smaller type, Halloween 2012. I checked the doors, heavy, with industrial push bars that clanked in your bones. They faced the parking lot, a 2-lane stretch of asphalt cupped by scrub. The ranger had said no one would come after 5. The posted hours for shoulder season were 9 to 5, with open by appointment, in a frame that felt more hopeful than real. I locked the doors, then locked them again. The wind shouldered the glass without sound, but the building seemed to sense it, a tremor in the air, a minute shiver. I told myself that was just the HVC. I made a circuit with my clipboard, the kind of slow, dutiful walk that makes you feel official. My footsteps clicked on the concrete floor, then hushed on carpet squares. The mezzanine felt different. The glass up there caught the sky and brought the day close enough to touch. The railing overlooked the exhibit hall, a diorama of the reservoir's skeleton in blue glass layers, as if you could peer down through water, silt, and time. A thin crack trembled in a corner of the glass. A spider had built a throne there, abandoned now, fluttering when air moved. I signed that I had checked it. It felt theatrical, like I was narrating my own alibi. By the time I finished the loop, the rain had started, a gentle patter that gathered into a steady hiss. The reservoir blurred, lights in the distant town smudged to yellow bruise marks. The Welcome Center became an inverted lantern, bright inside, dark outside. I could see everything but what watched me from the trees. The first sound came at 7, a soft staccato tapping like someone drumming polite fingers on glass. I was at the desk, reading in the wash of a desk lamp. The tapping stopped when I stood, resumed when I sat. Of course, I told myself it was branches, the fir, the storm. I went to the door anyway, because that is what you do when you are the person with the keys and the laminated binder. The parking lot yawned water and emptiness. Only the wind moved. On the way back, I passed the visitor log. It lay open to summer pages where handwriting nodded over itself. Loved the salmon display. Great for kids. Saw a hawk. A newer line, surprising in its clean script amid the messy joy of field trips, read, "We waited." It seemed like a joke, a child doing their best with spooky letters, but the pen marks were heavy, impressed so deep you could feel them with your finger. At 8, another tap, and then a whisper. Not a word, a thread of sound that unrolled from the direction of the water like someone warping their voice under a door. I told myself the building made noises. They all do. I was not familiar with this one. That didn't make it wrong. I warmed my hands around a mug I wished were full of whiskey. Steam rose from stale coffee like a ghost auditioning in a cheap theater. At 9, the lights in the far corner dimmed and came back. When they returned, they hummed a note higher, as if correcting themselves. The motion-activated bird display sounded, a cheerful robin that startled me into laughing in a tight, mean way that did not sound like me. My laugh hung in the space and made the quiet after worse. I pulled my jacket tighter and returned to the desk. The window behind it showed only my reflection, a pale oval on black. For a moment, in the smudge of the glass, I thought I saw the lobby from a different angle, as if the reflection were one heartbeat out of step. It looked like a trick of light. It looked like the kind of thing you do not tell anyone because you can hear yourself being ridiculous. At 9:30, someone knocked. It was not the tapping. It was a knock, knuckles on metal, not loud, just measured, like a sound practiced. The sort of knock you do when your mother tells you to be polite. It came from the side door that faced the staff parking spot. I stood and the knock came again, exactly the same, as if the knocker had recorded the sound and hit play twice. I made myself walk. The side corridor smelled like damp fleece. The exit sign bled red light into the rain. I reached the glass, and for a second the rain came into focus and nothing else did. Then the outside resolved, and there they were. 2 children under the eave, rain sliding off their hair in sheets. They were about 10, maybe 9. Hard to say ages under a rain sheen and a glass reflection. A boy and a girl, both too thin in jackets that had seen better closets. Their wet hair stuck like ink strokes. Their faces were moon palish in the lobby light and went darker at the eyes. They did not shiver, though everything around them did. The eave trembled, the fur bowed, the distance warped. I did what you do. I smiled in the automatic front desk way that lives in your cheeks. I gestured that we were closed. I mouthed, "Sorry." I pointed at the paper sign that said so. The girl stepped forward until her face was inches from the glass. Rain skittered from her eyebrows and kept going, like the water wanted to escape her. I had the sense of cold radiating off her that reached my skin without touching it. When she spoke, I did not hear her voice through glass so much as in the pit behind my sternum, where anxious heartbeats happen. "Can we come in?" she asked. The boy beside her stood with his hands folded. Their chins were tilted too level. Children's posture is messy. They lean into the world. These 2 stood like rulers propped against a wall. I got that small, mean laugh stuck in my throat again, partly at myself. The idiot who suddenly remembered an article read years ago about black-eyed children, supposed urban legend kids with eyes like polished pits who knock politely and ask for things you cannot give without consequences. A phone, a ride, permission to cross your door. People say encounters with them feel wrong in the bones, that they ask to be invited into homes or cars, that you feel a dread you cannot justify, as if your instincts have received a message before your mind has read it. That the stories began in the 1990s with a man named Brian, who wrote about them like a warning that was also a confession. How he saw 2 children one night and could not stop thinking about how their eyes swallowed light. I had filed it under Internet oddities, but I remembered enough to feel that dumb ancestral shiver, a story you shrug at by day and respect by night. The boy spoke now, his mouth making polite shapes. I didn't hear words, not deafness, more like the distance between 2 radio stations as you spin the dial. Wind breathed along the eave. The girl touched the bar of the door with 2 fingers and dragged them down the metal, not testing it, just making contact like a person who has learned how to seem human. I realized I had put my palm to the glass on my side, mirroring her within a pain's width. I jerked it back. "We're closed," I said aloud. My voice was too loud, a thing that did not belong here. I'm sorry. The girl smiled, which made her face wrong because it was the right smile done wrong. The muscles engaging, but none of the life. She said something. The sound went through me again like a second pulse. The boy blinked. If he had eyebrows, they were black as wet bark. His eyes, there is a way eyes pick up light they do not own. Even the darkest brown comma of iris shines. These did not. They were pits, not reflective, not glossy. Matte black, the exact absence of shine, like someone had reached in with a thumbnail and scraped the highlight out. Something very old in me took my hands off the door. I backed up. I shook my head like I could knock water from it. No, I said. I'm sorry. I can't. My apology sounded like a twice-used tissue. They did not pound. They did not beg. They simply waited. The girl kept that wrong smile on like she had seen it on a cereal box and was giving it a try. The boy tipped his head a degree, the way dogs listen to word music. A minute gathered itself, heavy. The exit sign ticked. The fluorescent hum tuned itself to the pitch of my teeth. A drop of rain climbed the glass wrong way up, and for a second I thought gravity had given up, which is to say, I have never been so aware of how much I depended on the world behaving. Some rational gear engaged. I went to the front desk and dialed the ranger. It rang and rang. I left a message that started official and slid into whisper. 2 kids are at the side door. Do I call the sheriff? They want in. I did not say, their eyes are wrong. Someone you don't know will think you mean color. I didn't drive to Virginia to be brave. I came because my editor wanted ambience. Wet gravel under tires, cicadas herniating the night, the Dopplered sigh of a late freight crossing old rails. The podcast needed an episode on urban legends that refuse to die, and the one with the rabbit suit and the hatchet refuses most stubbornly in the woods near Clifton. People call the narrow Southern Railway overpass on Colchester Road Bunnyman Bridge, like the nickname stuck to the concrete as firmly as the lichens. The bare facts are simple enough. In 1970, twice in 10 days, people told police that a man in a rabbit suit had threatened them with an axe near Guinea Road. Newspapers ran with it. 100 retellings dredged additional crimes and invented murders. And every fall, more people come to stand under a low arch of concrete and listen for a legend to speak. I arrived at dusk with a trunk full of gear and a thermos of coffee that tasted like pennies. The weather had been indecisive all afternoon, shoulder cool, spitting rain that never committed to drizzle. By the time I passed the wide lawns and the tidy mailboxes, the road had narrowed to 2 dark lanes that seemed to pull the trees closer. The overpass announced itself long before I reached it. You feel it. The air grows cooler, the light dims a shade, the forest becomes a jawbone of trunks with the road a sharpened tongue. The arch itself was smaller than all the photos made it seem, like the world had tightened around it as if to keep the rumor from escaping. I parked a respectful distance away and shouldered my bag. A sign warned against lingering and loitering and turning around, and for good measure, thinking about doing any of those things. I'm not a thrill seeker. I try to leave places better than I found them. But the episode needed field sound, and I knew the real noise, the kind that breathes into a microphone, wouldn't be plain day or safe distances. It would be the tiny of it, pebbles shifting where feet shouldn't be, the hollow knock of wood on stone, a voice carried farther than it should have gone. The bridge's underside had been tagged by teenagers who either believed in monsters or wanted to be them. High on the concrete ribs, black scrawl read, "Private." The second word had been washed away by time or county workers. My eyes kept filling it in. Property. It's always that word, with this story. It was the same sentence the couple heard in their car after the glass exploded inward, the same sentence the security guard heard from a man chopping a porch post with a long-handled axe. If the bridge has a liturgy, private property is its amen. I set my tripod just off the road and clipped a shotgun mic to it. The recorder's red light pulsed like a heartbeat. Another microphone, a lav, I dangled from a branch so it could catch anything small that the shotgun might miss. Ambient channels, I told myself, as if saying it aloud made me a scientist instead of someone who drove alone to the edge of a rumor. I checked levels. The bridge breathed back at me. Somewhere up on the tracks, a bird scolded in tight bursts. Zeet, zeet, zeet. Water dripped from the lip of the arch into a puddle that had traveled from rain to stain. Nothing happened, which is what always happens first. I walked through the arch. The clearance was a laugh, 12 feet if you believed the sign, lower if you believed your skull. The concrete stank like wet chalk and old creosote. My footsteps hushed themselves around me. On the far side, the trees pressed against one another as if huddled. I turned, listened. The recorder caught the faintly obscene sound of my own breathing, and then tap, tap, not a full knock, not confidence, tap, tap. I swung the light there. You don't realize how many shapes belong to the world until a flashlight makes them alien. The beam found the edge of the culvert, a curtain of vine, the glossy back of a beetle. The sound danced away. Tap. Silence. I waited. The evening thickened like honey cooled to the jar. A car hummed somewhere back toward the subdivision. Farther still, in the kind of distance that doesn't measure in miles, a train tested the sky with the low brass of its horn. The bridge seemed to suck in at that note, becoming suddenly temporary, a little arc of man-made certainty beneath a steel line that could cleave it in two. "You're on private property," I said softly to the recorder. "If something old wants to answer me, it knows the words." The horn cried again. The rails above me rattled, an anticipatory shiver that passed down the rivets and into my shoes. When the train arrived, it didn't creep. It took the night like a promise. Freight cars hammering the iron, wind flattening the leaves, the whole overpass turning to an organ pipe. My microphone spiked and flattened, spiked and flattened. I thought, good tape. I thought, this is why you came. I also thought, I won't lie, that while the train passed, I wouldn't hear a person approach me until it was too late. The dark after the train was a different dark. I walked back toward my car to reset my angles. I didn't see the hatchet until I nearly stepped on it. It wasn't old. That was the first wrongness. A short-handled camping thing, compact, the kind you could lose in leaf litter if the handle weren't painted neon. This handle was black, slick with the oil of someone's hands, and the head had a spit of new rust along the sharpened edge. I didn't touch it. I let the beam move over it, thinking of the story about the hatchet landing on the floor of the car like a dropped sentence. My Toyota was 20 yards away. I could see the glitter of my own windshield in my light. Okay, I said to the recorder, trying to keep the smile out of my voice. Someone's playing. The first scare is a gift. Your body calibrates. You stack your thoughts neatly, control your breath. Remind yourself that you are a person who chose this and that most monsters wear boots and cologne and go home when they're bored. You look left and right and up and never right behind you. You tell yourself you're not in a story. You remind yourself that in the hundreds of variations of the Bunny Man, many of them details invented wholesale, the only documented truth is a costumed man who shouted and broke things, who hated trespassers and new houses as much as he loved grim theatrics. You remind yourself of what the county archivist wrote. You do not think about Halloween. You do not think about the people turned away at checkpoints. You think tape. You think job. I picked up the hatchet by its handle and carried it into the frame of my camera like a magician showing a volunteer the deck. Found object, I said into the mic, then set it down exactly where I'd discovered it. I didn't want to keep holding something that felt like a dare. When I closed the trunk to retrieve extra batteries, my own face startled me in the glass. A known jump, a tired trick. I laughed. The road beyond the bridge ran empty in both directions, only a thin seam of sky visible. I pulled a hoodie tighter around me and clicked the recorder to monitor. I don't know exact minutes. The time between normal and not quite is hard to measure, but the escalation lives in my notes, in the waveform I would later scrub through, breathing shallow. It started with another voice. I was wiring my lav closer to the road, threading the line through a sapling so a passing truck wouldn't snag it, when I heard myself say, "In case something old wants to answer me, it knows the words." Only I wasn't speaking. I was breathing around a bobby pin that refused to stop thinking it was a paperclip. I was biting my lower lip. The recorder crackled. Then it played me back like a house with thin walls. In case something old wants to answer me, it knows the words. The audio wasn't perfect. It had that telephonic flatness of something one generation away from its source. I froze, hunter still, my hand dumb in the leaves. The playback continued. There was a little drag in the syllables, a little reverb like water in the throat. When it finished, the only sound was the dribble of the culvert and my heartbeat, full and silly in my ears. I stood up with my hands raised, palms out, the useless human sign for don't. "Very funny," I called into the tunnel. "You got me." Behind me, my car door locks thunked. Once, then again, as if fingers tested each one. I turned so fast I stepped on my own cable. The hood of my Toyota shone exactly as it should. The doors were all closed. On the passenger side, my window had crawled down by an inch, leaving a horizontal scar of black. I walked to the car, felt the cheapness of the door handle as I pulled it. The interior light came on and made the forest around me more night by contrast. Nothing was missing. But the glove compartment hung open on its broken hinge, a relic of the time a friend had searched for napkins with too much panic and too little grace. From inside it, half stuffed under my registration folder, something white peered out. It was a scrap of faux fur, matted by rain. Long, dirty fibers, cut at one edge by scissors. I reached toward it, hesitated, reached again, and pinched it away from the papers. The fibers clung to my skin with static. The smell was faintly chemical, like wallpaper paste. "Okay," I said again. What I meant was, not okay. There's a moment where the mind splits. The part of you that gathers evidence from the world, the microphones and the hatchet and the fur and the locks, the voice and the inch of the window, fights the part of you that knows how badly a mind can misread on purpose. I could catalog a dozen ways this could be a prank. Plenty of kids came here, plenty of bored men with clean boots and hungry laughs. But I hadn't heard an engine, and there were no footprints in the puddles except mine, and every time that night sky jailed itself in the arch, I could feel the world afield. Green things that had never cared for human voices, stone that didn't age on our schedule. I felt, strongly, and for no reason, that something didn't want me to leave. Not yet. Maybe that's why I went back under. The night, as if to reward me, offered a breeze that wasn't there a moment before. Leaves whispered and shushed one another, and something small ran through them like a stitch in a seam. I switched off my flashlight while I was still outside the bridge, letting my eyes spool out enough sensitivity to read shapes without inventing many. Without the light, the arch was a mouth, the road a tongue, the trees a throat. The last train had passed, the rails above were empty lines. Robert Bennett, I said, because names make stories stick, and his fiancée. I hated the word fiancé. A guard named Phillips at a construction site. That's all I'm giving you. 2 reports, everything else you can keep. Keep, the bridge whispered back. It wasn't the bridge. The voice came from the left wall, a little echo pinned to concrete. I traced it with the old animal part of my ears, a maple's geometry. Keep, a whisper, then the hiss of the tunnel's breath. Private, it said next, and I worked hard not to give the sentence its ending. Private, the voice insisted, a fraction louder, the syllables thinner than human speech, as if the engine for it were a throat made from isinglass. I moved the flashlight toward the wall, then decided I didn't want the certainty that light gives. I did the opposite. I took a step deeper into the tunnel. My right foot slipped a little on the slime where the puddle lapped at concrete. I caught myself on the wall, and my hand landed on something soft. I jerked back. The flashlight snapped on with involuntary honesty. The thing my hand had touched was an ear. It hung from a rusted spike hammered into the concrete rib, an ear cut from a costume head or a hood, long and ovate, the white fur grayed by dirt and age. It didn't look theatrical. It looked tired. Something moved farther back in the tunnel, a shadow inside a shadow. I lifted the light and fought not to cry out when the beam found the face. You have seen 100 rabbit heads, the cute and the grotesque, the kind used to sell chocolate and fright children on the internet. This one wanted nothing to do with either. It was too smooth, like skin stretched over wire. The eyes were wide black ovals, the way a spill keeps its shape when surface tension holds on. There were no whiskers. The mouth was a slit. The head canted to one side, question-marking me. The body beneath it was human but wrong. The proportions were off by the width of something, like a coat hung on the wrong hook. The figure stood inside the mouth of the tunnel, glowless. My flashlight couldn't decide if it liked the thing. It flickered once, twice, then held steady. "Hello," I said carefully, because I am a person who greets. "If you're looking for a conversation, I was just telling your story." The figure said, "You're on private property," and the consonants carried too many teeth. I swallowed. "I parked on the public road. I won't be long." It raised its right hand. The hatchet hung there, a little too far to the left in my beam, the edge turning the light to milk. "If you come any closer," it said. I know the line," I said. I didn't know I said it to hear the ending. It took a step toward me. That was when the sound came from above, faint at first, like someone rubbing a violin string with a thumb. Not a horn. Rails. My brain put it together late, another freight, sooner than it seemed possible. The figure stilled, its head cocking like an animal that gets the weather through its teeth. My mind did 3 things at once. It pictured me running, and the figure catching me with absurd long steps. It pictured me charging it and tearing at the head, finding a face underneath that didn't deserve what it had chosen. It pictured me standing, letting the train pass, letting the overpass shake, and seeing what moved when I didn't. I'm not brave. I stood. The figure took another step. It moved strangely, a human gait with something pinned under the heel. The hatchet's head brushed the concrete, making a chalkboard squeal. I lifted the light and saw that the rabbit head wasn't quite fitted. The seam along the jaw sagged, and there was something pale beneath, latex or skin. The train's horn called, too close now, flattening the rest of the sounds. Rails rattled. The figure was 10 feet away. "Why?" I asked it. because the question had lived in this bridge for 50 years. A rabbit? The head canted again, and the mouth slit widened into something like a smile. I am, it said, and suddenly the voice thinned to almost air. I am Rabbit. I can be anywhere. The line was familiar, borrowed from 100 blog posts and campfire tellings and Halloween tours. The bridge eats truth and shits out slogans. But hearing it in that mouth moved something in me I didn't like. It suggested plurality, it suggested contagion. The train hit the bridge with an earthquake's manners. Sound became a place. Wind arrived in a flat wall and shoved me backward into a cold column of air. The figure didn't flinch. It stepped and stepped until it was close enough that my light could not contain the head. The slit mouth opened wider. I couldn't see the hand that held the hatchet. The arm swept somewhere out of beam. I knew two things. I would not be able to hear it strike, and I would not know which direction to move until it was too late. I moved first. I dropped the flashlight. Dark swallowed me with appetite. The only light became the pale throat of the tunnel, granulated by dust, trembled into the air by the train. I threw myself to the right, against the wall where the ear hung, hoping the concrete would do what my legs could not. I felt the hatchet's breeze pass my left elbow. It bit the wall and stammered away. I lunged toward the dim, my fingers finding fur and plastic, and something that gave like an old book's spine. I pulled with the terrified strength that remembers how to carry children and furniture. The rabbit head slid sideways, then off. The body went with it. We fell together into water shallow enough to insult us. The train's cars clattered above like drawers of knives. I grabbed at wrists, found one, and squeezed hard. The hatchet hand jerked and tried to jerk again. I drove my knee upward, hit something that made a human exhale. The train roared its praise. The other hand tangled in my hair and yanked. We fought like people who don't know how to fight, clumsy, panicked, trying to become larger by sound. My heel slipped on slime. My shoulder banged the concrete rib. For a moment I had the hatchet in both hands, and for a moment the world pivoted around the thought of using it. I didn't. I flung it instead, end over end, into the tunnel, where it smacked itself stupid against stone, and then silence. The figure used my decision, twisted, and threw me off. The train began to end. The last car's rhythm slowed, became less assurance, more rumor. The figure scrambled to hands and knees. The rabbit head lay beside us, turned ear down, a collapsed moon. I had the stupid idea to grab it and run, but the figure moved faster. It snatched the head, pressed it to its face, and rose again, turning toward the arch's mouth. For a moment, in the afterbell of the train, framed by the low throat of the overpass, it looked like a story rehearsing itself. Silhouette, long-eared and hatchetless, pivoting as if to imprint itself on my brain in the shape of a shadow I would never fully iron out. Then it ran. Not at me. Out, into the trees. It cut across the road in 3 long, loping strides and vanished into dark like a pellet down a snake. I lay where I was until the bridge stopped shivering. My breath clanged in my mouth. My hands smelled like latex and wet. I reached for the flashlight by sound and found it, surprised it still worked. The puddle had turned milky with silt. The ear on the nail swayed in a wind that wasn't there. I went to my car. The locks were still down. The window was still scarred by an inch. I opened the trunk, folded my gear into it with the neatness of panic, and slammed it. My fingers shook so hard the keys were a rattle. The engine turned. The headlights carved 2 white wounds in the trees. When I swung the car around to face the bridge for one last look, some human need to keep the danger in sight, I saw a shape in my rearview mirror that made my scalp lift, something pale in the back seat. I didn't scream. I didn't turn around. I reached slowly behind, fingers stretching for the thing, and touched plastic. I dragged it forward into the light and laughed so hard the laugh turned into something else. It was the rabbit head, not the one from the tunnel, a different one. Older, the fur gray from decades of hands, the eyes painted black and chipped to show soft foam underneath. It had been sitting there in my back seat since I'd arrived. I'd brought it, for B-roll, for a gag I had meant to fake and then discredit in the edit, a reveal where I'd shake it at the camera to prove how easy it was to add sweets to a story's cavity. I was sick into the ditch. When I finished, the ditch smelled human. On the ride back to the motel, I kept feeling the car drag, right as if a second weight had joined mine. Every reflective sign suggested a long ear when we passed it. I locked the doors and unlocked them and locked them again. I rehearsed my report to the editor. The words behaved until they didn't. New ones tried to bruise their way in. I am Rabbit. I can be anywhere. I hated the line more every time it replayed. In the sterile light of the room, I took a shower so hot it didn't feel like water and laid my gear out to dry. The rabbit head sat in the armchair like an unpaying guest. I turned it so it faced the window. I told myself this was so the eyes wouldn't catch mine by accident. I told myself it was because I didn't want to grant it the dignity of a companion. Everything we tell ourselves to stay inside our skin is a story, too. At 2 a.m., I scrubbed through the night's recordings, headphones hugging my skull. Much of it was unhelpful. Me breathing, trains goring the air, the little taps that could be a knot contracting in a board as easily as footsteps. At 47 minutes, my own sentence arrived. In case something old wants to answer me, it knows the words. A few seconds later, it arrived again, thinner, like someone playing it through a phone and recording the playback on another phone. Then I heard my voice say, casually as a cough, "Hello." I didn't say hello. The figure had appeared, and I had said nothing first. I scrubbed back, listened again. The hello was mine. It had my mouth on it, my upward lilt, my little smile that tries to make sharp things round. I recorded my hand shaking as I reached for coffee. At 1 hour, 3 minutes, in the thinner voice that had borrowed mine, the recording said, "You're on private property." And then, this was new. This was not any of the quotes that lived online or in the county files. The voice said my name. First and last. It said it like a phrase it had been saving for a good moment. It said it with the slow skin care of a careful lip. I pulled off the headphones and discovered I had stopped breathing. I stood, walked to the door, put my eye to the peephole. The hallway yawned empty. I put the chain on the door, though it was already locked. I looked at the rabbit head. It faced the window like I had asked it to. There are tidy ways to end a story. I could tell you I called the police, and they did a sweep, and they found footprints that matched a specific boot sold at a big box store in 2019. And the camera on a house at the corner of Colchester and Chapel caught a man in gray with something white over his head. I could tell you I became the person who picked up the rabbit head slowly and found that the inside had been lined with old newspaper, and that tucked into the seam were 2 photographs of a face I recognized from a Washingtonian article, older now, but the same mouth. I could tell you I filmed the next day anyway, camera trembling in my grip while a county worker carefully replaced a sign. That's not how it happened. Before dawn, I woke without knowing why. The room was a box of bas-relief shapes, darker and less dark. The air conditioner hummed in its cheap metal sleeve. On the desk, my recorder blinked its red pulse. I distinctly remembered turning it off. In its tiny built-in speaker, my voice was speaking. I had not pushed play. "Robert Bennett," I said. "Phillips, that's all I'm giving you." Then, in the thinner voice that had used mine to say hello, "Keep, keep, keep." I reached for the recorder, and the voice, in my mouth but not from me, said again my name. "You're on private property," it told me, in the tone of a man noticing a deer in his yard. The air conditioner shut itself off. The suddenly heavy quiet made the next sound unmistakable, a soft, polite knock on my motel door. Tap, tap. I didn't go to the door. I did not move at all. The knock came again. Tap, tap. Whoever stood outside was patient. They didn't hammer. They didn't threaten. They stood, and I could see this in my mind too clearly for comfort, staring into the peephole with a long black eye that wasn't glass. The third knock came with words, "I have your tag number." The phrase had the weight of history on it, a polite menace, the legal righteousness of an angry man. The sound of it fitted to the door as if the wood had been tailored for this sentence. I stayed in bed with my hands inches above the coverlet, the way your body hovers when you're prepared to sprint and prepared to never move again. Eventually, the footsteps receded down the hall. I counted to 100, to 1,000, to some number that felt like protection. I stood and went to the door and looked through the peephole. Nothing. I opened the door. The hallway was meek and well lit. On the floor under the peephole lay a small hatchet with a black handle, the same kind you can buy at a camping aisle. Tied to it with twine was a scrap of white fur. I did all the things you are meant to do. I called the front desk, who called the police, who did not like driving out to the highway for small hatchets and big feelings. They took the hatchet in a bag. They asked questions I answered, and then more questions I didn't. They looked at the rabbit head in the chair for longer than I expected. They told me to drive during daylight and stay away from the bridge if it made me nervous. They did not say urban legend. They also did not say, "We believe you." When they left, I put the rabbit head into a trash bag and tied the top. I carried it to the dumpster and dropped it in. The world swallowed it without indigestion. I got into my car, which started politely. I drove away from Clifton with the windows up and the radio off and the sun finding the shape of trees. I never filed the episode. The recordings exist. The edit has a name in my project folder, but no cuts on the timeline. Because here is the thing I can't shape into a conclusion that makes sense. Some nights, in my own apartment, 2 states away, my phone, muted, sleeping, plays a sound from my files. A train, a distant horn, a polite knock that's only 2 taps. The red light on my recorder pulses even when it's not plugged in, and even when I've removed the batteries entirely, pulsing like a heartbeat that does not belong to a machine. On the morning I finally accepted that I would never finish the Bunnyman episode, I went downstairs to my car with a bag of recycling and found a note under the wiper blade. It was torn from a legal pad, the kind with a gum binding that leaves a furry edge. The handwriting was neat, schoolteacher tidy, 3 words in a line that leaned just a little right: private, property, mine. There was a small smudge at the corner of the paper that looked like paste or glue or something that dried clear. When I held the note up to the light, I could see a single white hair pressed there, long and synthetic, the kind a costume ear would shed. I stood in the parking lot with the note in my hand and realized that nothing in me felt surprised. Fear, yes. Disgust. A slight laugh that wasn't humor, but not surprise. Because once a story knows your name, it writes you down in it. You become an easy page to flip to. You become an address. I changed my license plates. I moved apartments. I stopped telling friends where I was the day I was there. I started looking hard at any knock that came too politely, at any recorded voice that carried that thin hollowness like breath from a jar. I avoided bridges. The rabbit head did not return. Neither did the hatchet. If this were a neat story, I might make them talismans, objects that held the wrongness so I could keep what was left of my life. But this isn't neat. There is no souvenir. There are only the small borrowings. My voice used from the hall and back to me, my name said with the exact impatience of a neighbor telling a stranger to leave his yard, the inch of window that slides down by itself when the night decides it's time to look inside. If you go, don't go alone. Don't bring props. Don't give a story a handle it can pick you up by. Stand in the light and listen. And when you hear the small taps that might be a prank and might be a legend rehearsing itself, decide quickly what you believe, because someone else might have already decided for you. And if a kind voice tells you, through a door you paid for and a lock you chose, that you're on private property, remember that the word property is large enough to include a person. If you open the door, if you crack it even, know that you are not loaning the night a hallway. You are giving it your name. You are saying, "This is mine." The night loves nothing more than that. It writes those words down. It keeps them. It keeps you. On Halloween this past year, a date that keeps its own calendar in a place like Fairfax, I woke to the sound of a train in a town where no freight runs. The horn made the walls soft. I rose, went to the door, and stood with my ear near the peephole without looking through. The knock did not come. The voice did not come. Something else did. It was the sound of paper sliding in, the polite hush of a note being given and accepted. I didn't pick it up until morning. The sunlight found the black eyes before I did. It was a flyer for a community event 2 towns over, a haunted folklore night promising hot cider and stories and a costume contest. Someone had drawn rabbit ears on the cartoon ghost with a felt pen. On the bottom corner, in small letters no bigger than a breath, someone had written my name. No threat, no sentence, just my name, the way a friend would write it on a party invitation. If you are reading this because you like good endings, here is one I can offer. I didn't go. I made coffee that tasted like pennies and stepped onto my balcony and watched the morning find things that needed finding. My recorder sat on the table and did not blink. My phone did not play a sound that wasn't asked. The world was exactly itself. It holds. Most days, it holds. And still, sometimes as I fall asleep, I hear words as if spoken from the other side of a small arch, as if my door were shorter than I think and my hallway smaller and nearer to the trees. Keep, keep, keep. And then, almost kindly, almost grateful that I brought it tape and a name and a head for its shelf, the night says, "You're on private property." And I, who am always less brave than I want to be, answer as softly as a leaf, "I know."